Let's find out what happened to every Hogwarts professor after the war. Minerva McGonagall. McGonagall was given the Order of Merlin, first class, by new Minister for Magic, Kingsley Shacklebolt, the wizarding world's highest honor. For a woman who had spent decades serving an institution that repeatedly failed to protect the people inside it, she accepted this with the grace of someone who absolutely did not need the validation, but appreciated the gesture. Shortly after, she was added to the Famous Witches and Wizards Chocolate Frog card series. She later admitted she never imagined that happening. 4 months after the battle, once the structural damage was repaired and the protective enchantments fully restored, she was formally appointed head mistress by the Board of Governors, the same board that had suspended her predecessor, the same board that had handed Umbridge a pen and a stack of educational decrees. They redeemed themselves slightly by picking the right person this time. Only slightly. Following a private conversation with Harry Potter, she made one of the most controversial decisions of her early tenure. She personally commissioned a portrait of Severus Snape for the Headmaster Gallery. The portrait hadn't appeared automatically, because technically, Snape had abandoned his post before dying. The castle's enchantments had rules about that. McGonagall decided the castle's enchantments were wrong. She was, as usual, correct. She hired Neville Longbottom as the new Herbology professor. A woman who once watched him struggle to keep a plant alive in her Transfiguration class had enough faith in who he'd become to hand him a classroom and a set of students. She was still headmistress in 2008, when she granted permission for Dumbledore's notes on the tales of Beedle the Bard to be published. She was still headmistress in 2017, during the events of The Cursed Child, dealing with Albus Potter and Scorpius Malfoy's complete inability to leave the timeline alone. One interview from Rowling suggests she'd have retired by the epilogue. The Cursed Child contradicts this by showing her still in the chair. Canon is, as always, doing its best. The most reliable sources place her tenure ending sometime in the early 2020s. She never remarried. Her one great love, a Muggle farmer named Dougal McGregor, was a path she chose not to take before Hogwarts. She later married her colleague, Elphinston Urquhart, who died of a venomous tentacula bite 3 years in. She did not seek another relationship after that. The most terrifying person at any staff meeting in Wizarding Britain. The most respected headmistress Hogwarts had seen in a generation. Horace Slughorn. Horace Slughorn stayed, which, given that his entire relationship with danger was historically based on not being near it, said something. He remained on as a potions master and head of Slytherin House after the war. His bravery at the Battle of Hogwarts, specifically the moment he turned up with half of Hogsmeade behind him and dueled Lord Voldemort directly, was widely publicized. For a man who had spent 30 years carefully avoiding anything that could be described as a fight, he had chosen an extraordinary moment to make his exception. This mattered more than people initially realized. The posthumous rehabilitation of Regulus Black, alongside Slughorn's public example, began to lift something that had sat over Slytherin House like a fog for centuries. The assumption that the house was, essentially, a production line for dark wizards. Slughorn's portrait was installed in the Slytherin common room specifically because of his bravery at the battle. Not his years of teaching, not his distinguished career. The one moment he ran toward the problem instead of away from it. That portrait was placed there to show future Slytherin students what the house was actually capable of. It was probably the most important thing he ever did. Slughorn himself, according to Rowling's Pottermore writings, never married, had no children, kept up a voluminous correspondence with former students, and maintained a serious dedication to fine wine. His wand was cedar and dragon heartstring. He was an expert occlumens. He had spent 50 years collecting interesting people the way other witches and wizards collected books, and he had the letters to prove it. He retired for the second time somewhere before 2016. His first retirement, of course, ended when Dumbledore and Harry showed up at his hiding place inside a Muggle's house and reminded him that interesting people have a way of finding you whether you want them to or not. His second retirement stuck. Filius Flitwick survived the war, returned to the charms classroom. That sounds understated, and it is, because Flitwick was a man who fought in the Battle of Hogwarts, a former dueling champion who had spent decades pretending to be unremarkable, and then walked back to his desk and kept teaching. He continued as head of Ravenclaw House. According to Pottermore's post-war descriptions, written in present tense well after the battle, he was the best and most knowledgeable charms master alive in the world at that point. His office door was always open to Ravenclaws. He kept a tin of cupcakes in his desk drawer for distressed students. This is the kind of detail that explains why the cleverest students in the school chose to come to a tiny, cheerful man about their problems rather than going to the library, which was famously also available. He taught the next generation. He taught Harry and Ginny's children. He is, as far as canon confirms, still teaching. No retirement announced. No major post-war events documented. Just decades more of one of the finest magical educators in Britain, working in the job he was born to do. Pomona Sprout survived the war, went back to the greenhouses. Neville Longbottom joined her department around 2008, first as a staff member under her, eventually as a fully established professor teaching alongside her. This was a woman who had identified Neville's talent at 11 years old, when he was struggling with almost every other subject and the wizarding world had largely written him off. She saw something. She was right. And then she got to watch him grow into a professor in her own department before handing him the keys entirely. Pomona Sprout retired in 2020. Neville succeeded her as head of department. The greenhouses passed from one pair of dirt-stained hands to another. The mandrakes didn't notice the difference. The students very much did. During the calamity in the late 2010s, she assisted the Statute of Secrecy Task Force post-retirement, because apparently retirement did not mean disengagement for Pomona Sprout. It meant slightly fewer marking piles. Post-retirement, canon goes quiet on her. She had 30 years in those greenhouses, a generation of students who could identify a venomous tentacula by smell, and a successor who owed her everything. Rubeus Hagrid. Hagrid went back to his hut. Obviously. The idea of Hagrid anywhere else is genuinely incoherent. He resumed his roles as Keeper of Keys and Grounds and Care of Magical Creatures Professor. He carried on describing genuinely dangerous animals as misunderstood. He kept offering rock cakes that were a known structural hazard. He remained the first face generations of new students saw when they arrived by boat. A 9-foot half-giant with a crossbow and an enormous heart, which was probably not the first impression most 11-year-olds were expecting from the safest school in Britain. Confirmed still at Hogwarts in September 2017 by the epilogue itself. Harry tells his son Albus at King's Cross that Hagrid has already invited them both to tea. Hagrid, at roughly 89 years old, was at his hut, at his school, exactly where he always was. Rowling confirmed in 2007 that Hagrid never married and had no children. Her explanation? Most giants had killed each other off, and there were almost no compatible partners left. His relationship with Madame Maxime, which had been something during their joint mission to the giant colonies, quietly ended after that mission was over. He stopped mentioning her. It didn't continue. No retirement, no marriage, no departure. Same hut, same creatures, same open door, same Hagrid. Sybill Trelawney survived the war, returned to the North Tower, continued predicting the deaths of students who then, frustratingly, kept not dying. Trelawney stayed on as divination professor under McGonagall's headmistress tenure, teaching into at least the 2010s with her characteristic combination of dramatic prophecy, significant sherry consumption, and total commitment to atmosphere. She made her peace with Firenze over time. The centaur she had called Dobbin and the Horse for years, who had briefly replaced her in her own classroom, which she had neither forgiven nor technically forgotten. The sharing of divination classes continued for a period after the war. It was not the smoothest professional arrangement in Hogwarts history, but it functioned. She had been briefly married before Hogwarts to a Mr. Higglebottom. She divorced him when he expected her to take his surname. Sybill Trelawney did not take anyone's surname. She was, and remained, a Trelawney, great-great-granddaughter of the celebrated Cassandra Trelawney, a genuine seer, which made Sybill's relationship with her gift complicated. She had produced exactly 2 confirmed prophecies in her life, both in her own classroom, neither of which she remembered afterward. Everything else was theater. Firenze. Firenze fought in the Battle of Hogwarts and was injured. After the battle, his centaur herd did something that centaurs, as a rule, as a culture, as creatures who had spent centuries watching human affairs with contempt and refusing to involve themselves, almost never do. They admitted they were wrong. His pro-human position, which had cost him his place in the herd, which had led to him being beaten and left for Hogwarts to take him in, had turned out to be correct. The herd acknowledged this. They welcomed him back. He returned to the Forbidden Forest, took a leadership role among a group of centaurs who'd studied star movements and patrolled the forest boundary. His Hogwarts teaching post effectively ended with his return to the herd. The forest was his place, had always been his place, and now he was allowed back in it. In 2017, during the events of the Cursed Child, he encountered Albus Potter and Scorpius Malfoy in the Forbidden Forest and led them back to the castle with a warning. He had paid a significant price for choosing the right side at the right moment. He had lost his home, his herd, his standing. The war gave those things back to him. Cuthbert Binns continued teaching history of magic. The war had no effect on him whatsoever. He is a ghost. He arrived at his classroom from a different direction than usual, which is to say, through the wall instead of the door, or the ceiling instead of the wall, depending on the source, and continued teaching exactly where he left off. His notes were not updated. His delivery did not change. His attendance figures, famously, did not improve. The castle was half destroyed around him. A Dark Lord died on the grounds. The course of wizarding history was fundamentally altered. Professor Binns began the next lesson on the International Warlock Convention of 1289. This is the complete documented account of Cuthbert Binns' post-war story. There is no more. He has been dead for 200 years and has not yet noticed. In some ways, that is the most peaceful outcome in this entire list. Rolanda Hooch. She returned to the Quidditch pitch for her once-a-movie appearance. Specifically, what she returned to was the site of a Quidditch pitch, because the actual pitch had been burned to the ground early in the Battle of Hogwarts. She oversaw its restoration and continued refereeing. Madame Hooch had been keeping 17-year-olds from killing each other in the air for decades. Rebuilding a pitch was, relatively speaking, manageable. She was confirmed still teaching in 2020 by Wizards Unite game data, making her one of the longest-serving confirmed post-war Hogwarts staff members in canon. During the Calamity in the late 2010s, she assisted the Statute of Secrecy Task Force by having members cast spells at moving targets while she dodged them on her broom. This was more or less just her teaching style, adapted slightly for combat readiness. Rowling confirmed she invented no romantic backstory for Hooch. Never married, per canon. No known personal life events beyond the pitch, the whistle, and the broomstick. There is a version of a post-war story that is entirely about the job. Rolanda Hooch's is that version. She taught students to fly. She taught them to stay on the brooms. She taught them the rules. She showed up to every match, on time, and kept things moving. For some people, the work is the whole answer. That seems to have suited her perfectly. Neville Longbottom. This one takes a moment, because Neville Longbottom started as the boy everyone had written off, and ended as a man who had outgrown every room they tried to keep him in. Immediately after the war, he briefly joined the Aurors, recruited by Kingsley Shacklebolt alongside Harry and Ron to help rebuild a department that had been systematically corrupted under Voldemort's ministry. Neville Longbottom, the boy who had been afraid of Professor Snape, who had been told by his grandmother for years that he was a disappointment to his family's name, put on an Auror badge. That took a moment to fully process, even at the time. He left eventually, came back to Hogwarts, joined the Herbology department under Pomona Sprout. He married Hannah Abbott before 2014. Fellow Dumbledore Armies member, fellow survivor, fellow person who had chosen the right side when it cost something. For a period, Hannah ran the Leaky Cauldron in London while Neville taught at the school. By 2014, there were reports she had retrained as a healer and applied to be Hogwarts matron, suggesting the couple eventually moved to the school full-time. He was named godfather to Albus Severus Potter, Harry's second son, which meant Harry looked at the person he trusted most with his children's future and chose the boy from the prophecy that almost was. The boy who had stood in the Great Hall with Voldemort's wand pointed at him and refused to move. Neville still kept his Dumbledore's army galleon. Rowling confirmed it. He kept it and, occasionally, showed students during class. Just, quietly, a reminder. A tiny coin that had once summoned teenagers to a secret room to learn spells their school had decided they shouldn't know. A coin that had carried messages during the darkest year Hogwarts ever had. He was, in the end, exactly where he was supposed to be. In the greenhouses, teaching plants, watching students figure out what they were made of. The same thing Pomona Sprout had once done for him. The greatest arc in the entire series. And it kept going after the last page. Next up, we theorize what might have happened if other characters raised Harry and how the story might have changed. That's here,